bow and arrow firefights, flying horses, and at least 3, possibly 4, assassinations. Join me today as we discuss the first half of the Asuka period and the legendary prince who's appeared on Japanese currency more times than any other figure in history, and yet some say he may not have even existed at all. You're watching Japanese History, the textbook, and this is the Buyuden Japanese History Channel. Hello everyone, welcome back to Japanese History, the textbook, the series where we make our way chronologically through Japanese history, focusing on the people, events, and themes that are emphasized in actual history classes in Japanese schools. If you are not familiar with my concept for this series, you can check that out in my first episode on the Paleolithic and Jomon periods. For everyone else, I do want to jump right in, but there is one thing I'd like to mention before I start about some of the terminology used in this episode. I will be using the words emperor and empress quite frequently in this video, but none of the Japanese rulers discussed here actually would have been called emperor or tenno rather during their lifetimes. During the first half of the Asuka period, the title of Ookimi, or Great King, which we discussed in episode 3, was very much still in use, and the title of Emperor was something applied posthumously to all of these rulers after it came into use at the end of the 7th century. I will be using the Emperor-Empress title as that is how Japan's imperial household agency officially refers to these rulers, but I just want everyone to keep in mind that historically we are still in the Great King era. Alright, with no further ado, let's get started. Japanese History, the textbook, Episode 4, The Asuka Period, Part 1. We ended our previous episode discussing the conflict over Buddhism between the Soga and the Mononobe, 2 powerful clans in the Yamato government. But I'd like to start today's episode by digging a little deeper into who these clans, particularly the Soga, were. The Soga were a branch family of the Kazuraki clan, an old family hailing back to the early days of the Yamato government, with marriage ties to the royal family. They gradually expanded their power and influence throughout the Kofun period, and in the 6th century, they set up their power base in the Asuka region, in the middle of what is the modern prefecture of Nara. From here, they forged alliances with Toraijin clans of Korean immigrants, whose knowledge and technology they used to get themselves put in charge of financial and production matters for the Yamato government. They worked hard to establish more and more miyake lands for the royal family, and eventually they came to hold a leadership role in the political world of Kofun Japan. When Buddhism arrived to the archipelago from Baekje in 538 CE, they actively encouraged its spread, an attitude likely influenced by their friendship with the Korean clans, and this brought them into conflict with the Mononobe, another old and powerful clan who had long overseen military matters for the Yamato government. Soga no Iname, the Oomi minister and Buddhism proponent who we discussed in the last episode, married 2 of his daughters to Emperor Kinmei and established one of the first examples we will see of the maternal grandfather relationship, a strategy for attaining power that will be repeatedly used throughout Japanese history by those wishing to exert control over the imperial house. Both daughters bore children for Emperor Kinmei, and 3 of those children eventually became emperors themselves, further increasing the status and influence of the Soga clan, though Iname would not live to see their coronations. The existence of these 2 royal lines would actually go on to cause some succession disputes, as there was not yet an established custom of parent-to-child succession, and passage of the kingship from sibling to sibling, for example, was not uncommon. One of these disputes occurred in 587 after the death of Emperor Yomei, the son of Emperor Kinmei and one of Iname's daughters. Iname's son, Soga no Umako, came into conflict with Mononobe no Moriya, son of his father's old rival Mononobe no Okoshi, over which royal relative should ascend to the chrysanthemum throne next. Umako eventually won out, having Moriya's candidate assassinated and placing his nephew on the throne as Emperor Sushun. Umako and Moriya, who had both followed in their respective fathers' footsteps to attain the top-level government positions of Oomi and Oomuraji, continued to feud, however, and their conflict came to a head later that year. Determined to put an end to the Mononobe's opposition once and for all, Umako secured a number of allies within the imperial court and assembled an armed force to attack the Mononobe residents. Participating in this attack, according to legend, was the 14-year-old Prince Shôtoku, son of the late Emperor Yomei, who was already a devout believer of the Buddhist religion. The Mononobe, however, as the clan responsible for handling the Yamato government's military affairs, would be no pushover, and they are said to have repelled the Soga forces multiple times, with Moriya himself firing arrow after arrow at the Soga warriors from atop a tree. With the situation looking grim, the Prince Shôtoku is said to have sat down and begun carving wooden statues of the Shitenno, 4 heavenly kings, guardian gods of the Buddhist religion and Buddhist mythology. Upon completing his carvings, the young prince prayed to the statues that if the Soga should secure victory in this battle, he would build a temple to the 4 heavenly kings in thanks for their support. Shortly thereafter, a Soga arrow struck and killed Mononobe no Moriya in his treetop perch. The tide of the battle turned, and the Soga were able to win the day. True to his word, Prince Shôtoku went on to construct the temple of Shitennoji, which still stands in the modern city of Osaka. The tale of this battle at the Mononobe residence is much more firmly in the territory of legend than fact, but it offers us fascinating insight into how these people and times were perceived by the generations that came after. With the destruction of the Mononobe, Soga no Umako was now the uncontested leader of the political world in Japan, which he demonstrated for all to see in 592 when he organized the assassination of Emperor Sushun, the man he himself had helped place on the throne just a few years earlier. Sushun had made a remark that led Umako to fear that he had fallen out of favor and his life was in danger, and he decided to make a preemptive strike on the emperor. Umako faced 0 repercussions for this action, and he moved on to replace Sushun with the late Emperor Yomei's younger sister, another grandchild of Soga no Iname, who ascended to the throne as Japan's first true empress, Empress Suiko. This marks the start of the roughly 120-year era known in Japanese history as the Asuka Period, as Suiko's palace was located in the Asuka region, which, you will recall, was the Soga clan's seat of power. Upon her ascension, Suiko appointed the now 19-year-old Prince Shôtoku, who was also her nephew, to be her sessho, her regent who would handle policymaking in her place. As regent, Prince Shôtoku's goals were twofold: strengthen the unity of the Yamato kingdom under the office of emperor, and promote the worship of Buddhism throughout the kingdom's lands. As mentioned earlier, Prince Shôtoku was the son of the late Emperor Yomei, and his mother was Yomei's half-sister, a daughter of Emperor Kinmei and one of Soga no Iname's daughters. This means that, in addition to his imperial blood, Shôtoku was actually a descendant of the Soga clan on both sides of his family tree. A little off-putting, certainly, but let's try to hold our modern sensibilities in check here. The Prince Shôtoku of legend, and indeed there is little of him that isn't legend at this point, was the sort of gifted genius who only comes around once every 2 or 3 centuries, and tales of his incredible intellect and memorization abilities abound, such as one famous anecdote purporting his ability to listen to 10 questions at once and then reply precisely to each one. He's also said to have had supernatural powers, such as instinctively making a Buddhist prayer at the age of 2 and having a bone of Gautama Buddha resultantly materialize in his palm, and an episode where he chose a divine horse out of a stable of several hundred, and then rode it around the sky and over Mount Fuji. In reality, his name during his lifetime seems to actually have been Umayato, Umayato no O or Umayato no Miko, and Prince Shôtoku was a title bestowed on him posthumously and not seen in historical documents until well over 100 years after his death. As a result, there is a growing trend in modern school textbooks to refer to him by his original name, but due to the fact that he has existed in the public consciousness as Prince Shôtoku literally for centuries, there seems to be a general reluctance among many modern Japanese to embrace this change. Indeed, he has appeared on Japanese banknotes in the 20th century for a total of 7 times. Moreover, while tradition holds that the prince was appointed sessho, regent, by his aunt the Empress, this position probably did not yet exist at this time, and so it is likely that he was simply participating in the government as a powerful member of the royal family and a likely candidate for eventual imperial succession. In fact, if he hadn't predeceased Empress Suiko, which, spoiler alert, he predeceases Empress Suiko, odds are that he would have become emperor eventually. Finally, there's even a theory that Prince Shotoku didn't really exist at all, or that he at least wasn't responsible for the string of great achievements attributed to him. On that same note, it is also suspected that his famous portrait, painted about a century after his death, may be a depiction of an entirely different person, and thus not a portrait of Prince Shotoku at all. There seems to be a lot of room yet in the scholarship for a critical re-examination of this legendary figure, but today we will deal with him according to the most standardized narrative of Japanese history. The three most important political achievements of Shotoku's lifetime, which he carried out in cooperation with Soga no Umako and Empress Suiko, were the establishment of the 12-court rank system in 603, the issuing of the 17 injunctions in 604, and the dispatching of the Kenzuishi, embassies that he sent to the Chinese Sui dynasty. The 12-court rank system, known in Japanese as the Kanyi Junikai, was, as its name suggests, a system which newly sorted court bureaucrats into 12 ranks which were physically indicated by means of specially colored caps, kammuri, assigned to each rank. What made this new system unique is that it did away with the hereditary succession of ranks and job duties, and instead assigned its ranks to individuals based on their personal abilities and achievements. While it did not replace the old Shisei system, it acted as a significant new addition on top of that system that allowed bureaucrats to advance up the governmental hierarchy regardless of whether their family bore a prestigious kabane title or not. The 17 injunctions, known as the Junanajo no Kenpon in Japanese, was a code of ethics and conduct for court bureaucrats, whose aim was to encourage more unity and obedience among the Yamato government's Gozoku lords. Foremost among its 17 stipulations were the cultivation of a spirit of wa, i.e. a spirit of cooperation, adherence to the Buddhist faith, and absolute loyalty to the emperor. Despite its Japanese name, which includes the word Kenpo, meaning constitution in modern Japanese, the 17 injunctions was not a legal document, but merely the expression of the ideal to which those individuals serving in the Yamato government should aspire. Interestingly, in its mention of the spirit of wa, the kanji character being used is not the wa that we see in Chinese documents describing Wakoku, or Japan, but rather the wa that is used by the Japanese themselves even today to characterize their country, as in words like washoku and wafuku. Now, this wouldn't be an episode of Japanese History, the textbook, without a cute little Japanese mnemonic to remember things by, and thankfully there is one of those for the 17 injunctions. The mnemonic is Mureyoru Tami ni 17 no Kenpo, which we can translate as 17 injunctions for the gathered people, with Mureyoru meaning to gather or to flock together, Tami meaning people or citizens, and 17 no Kenpo being, as we discussed earlier, the Japanese name for the 17 injunctions. The only part of this mnemonic that we really need to pay attention to is the Mureyoru section, as this will give us the date that the injunctions were issued. Mu gives us 6, as in mutsu or muika. The most common Japanese word for 0 is just 0, but another slightly less common word for 0 is re, and the re in Mureyoru references this to give us our second number, 0. Finally, the yo in Mureyoru gives us the number 4, as the Japanese word for 4 is yon. Put it all together, and we get the year that the 17 injunctions were issued, 604 CE. The final great achievement of the Prince Shotoku era were his embassies to the Chinese Sui court, the Kenzuishi, Japan's first official embassies to China since the days of the 5 kings of Wa. The Sui dynasty, or Zui in Japanese, had unified China and ended the northern and southern courts period in the year 589 CE, and Prince Shotoku sent his first embassy to the Nascent dynasty in the year 600, although this embassy is only mentioned in Chinese records. According to these records, on the occasion of this embassy's visit, the Chinese Emperor Wen, Bunte in Japanese, had his subordinate inquire to the messenger about Japanese customs. The messenger replied that the great king of Wakoku viewed the heavens as his elder brother and the sun as his younger brother, and that he engaged in affairs of state during the night while it was still dark, but that when the sun rose he entrusted matters to his little brother, i.e. the sun, and refrained from handling any governmental tasks. The Chinese records, by the way, make no mention of the fact that the great king of Wakoku was actually a queen at this time, so it is quite possible that this information was not even mentioned by the messenger. Either way, Emperor Wen responded that this style of government was highly irrational, instructed the Japanese messenger to have his king correct this ridiculous custom, and refused to entertain any further diplomacy. The whole affair was likely quite embarrassing for the Japanese, and this may be the reason that it is recorded in Chinese records but not in Japanese ones. It is interesting, however, that Prince Shotoku's first two big political reform projects, the 12-court rank system and the 17 injunctions, were carried out just after his failed embassy, hinting that the prince may have been directly responding to the Sui emperor's criticism. Undeterred, Prince Shotoku sent his second embassy in 607, led by Onono Imoko, a bureaucrat of comparatively low family status, who had risen high in the Yamato government thanks to his intelligence and talent and the ability-based 12-court rank system established by Prince Shotoku. This embassy is recorded in both Chinese records and in the Nihon Shoki, which should give you some foreshadowing regarding its success. In the Chinese record, it is written that Onono Imoko praised the Sui emperor, now Emperor Yang, son of Emperor Wen, for his vigorous promotion of Buddhism, and explained that he had brought monks to learn from his example. Imoko also presented a letter to Emperor Yang in which it was written that the Emperor of the land where the sun rises sends this letter to the Emperor of the land where the sun sets. Emperor Yang was apparently quite irritated by the wording of this letter, as the same kanji characters, tenshi, were used in both instances of the word emperor. This implied that the ruler of Wakoku was somehow in the same class of sovereign as the Sui emperor, an implication which the Chinese found both laughable and insulting. Emperor Yang also may have been displeased by the metaphorical implication of himself being the emperor of the land where the sun sets, which could be taken to infer that his country was on the decline, somewhat prophetical considering that the Sui dynasty would indeed fall only 11 years later. Ultimately, however, it seems to have been the use of the word tenshi that set him off, and he instructed his foreign minister to never show him such a barbaric letter again. Despite the emperor's displeasure, however, the diplomatic talks did not break down, and the Sui dynasty would end up sending a return embassy to Japan under the leadership of a man called Haiseisei. This was quite a victory for the Japanese, as it meant that their bold attempt to negotiate with the Chinese on more equal footing had actually succeeded. The story of this embassy is actually simplified in many textbooks as this tale of Japan demanding to treat with China on completely equal terms and having their bravery and confidence rewarded. But in reality, this was neither Japan's intention nor the outcome. The Sui did, however, recognize the great king of Wakoku as an independent sovereign, as opposed to establishing the sort of lord-vassal relationship that the Chinese typically established with other foreign powers at this time, and this does make the 607 embassy quite unique in the grand historical scheme. A possible motivation for the Sui's decision to do this was the fact that they were actively in conflict with the Goguryeo in Korea at this time, a conflict in which they were experiencing significant difficulties, and it is likely that they didn't want to accidentally turn Wakoku into a Goguryeo ally. In 608, when Haiseisei returned to China, Onono Imoko accompanied him, beginning what would be the third official embassy to the Sui. This time, Imoko brought along a number of scholars and scholar monks, with Takamuko no Genri, Min, and Minabuchi no Shoan being names of particular note. The cultural and political knowledge that they acquired on this trip would be put to great use in advancing Japan's culture and governmental institutions upon their return home. The culture that began to blossom in Japan at this time is known as Asuka culture, or Asuka bunka, and it was defined by its being Japan's first Buddhism-centric culture. It really began even before Prince Shotoku's embassies to the Sui, being kicked off by Empress Suiko's flourishing Three Treasures Edict, the Sampo Koryu no Mikoto Nori, which she issued in 594, just a year after becoming Empress. The three treasures refer to the most important ideals at the heart of Buddhism: the Buddha, his teachings, and the monks that spread his word. And this edict was issued with the goal of making Buddhism really begin to take root in Japan. After its issuance, a number of Gozoku clans responded by building Buddhist temples, such as the Soga clan with their Asuka-dera, and the Hata clan with their temple of Koryuji. Another famous Asuka period temple, Horyuji, is the oldest existing compound of wooden buildings in the world. The sculpting of numerous Buddhist statues naturally accompanied this wave of construction, and famous examples such as Horyuji's Shaka Triad sculpture and Asuka-dera's seated Shaka Nyorai sculpture, also known as the Asuka Daibutsu, still exist to this day, although the latter is mostly composed of Kamakura period restorations. Finally, two famed examples of other cultural handicrafts of the period are the Tamamushi no Zushi miniature shrine, whose decoration is a rare example of Asuka period painting, and the Tenjikoku Shucho mandala, the oldest known piece of embroidery art in Japan. The influences of China and Korea on Asuka culture go without saying, but because of the origins of Buddhism and the long route that it took to reach Japan, elements of Indian, West Asian, and even Hellenistic Greek culture can be felt in the art and architecture of Asuka period Japan. The Prince Shotoku of legend was something of a superman, but the flesh and blood Shotoku was very much a mortal man, and in the year 622 he fell ill and died at the age of 48. One of his last purported achievements before his death was to work with Soga no Umako in the compilation of Japan's first histories, the Kokki, or the Record of the Nation, and the Tennoki, or the Record of the Emperors, which was possibly named something else originally, as the word Tenno was not yet in use at this time. Both books were lost to fire, sadly, but they are mentioned in the Nihon Shoki, which was written about a century later. After the death of Prince Shotoku, the Soga clan's grip on power grew even more overbearing and monopolistic. Soga no Umako was succeeded by his son, Soga no Emishi, whose high-handed abuse of authority culminated with him unilaterally appointing his own son, Soga no Iruka, to the office of Oomi without consulting the Empress or anyone else. Emishi and Iruka also built residences on a hill overlooking the imperial palace, putting them physically above the imperial family, and they even named these residences in such a way as to imply equal status to the emperor. Iruka even attacked the late Shotoku's son, Prince Yamashiro no Oe, forcing him and his family to commit suicide, and in the process wiping out Prince Shotoku's direct family line. Fearing for the future of the kingdom, the bureaucrat Nakatomi no Kamatari began formulating a plot to overthrow the Soga, but he needed a powerful ally in his corner to do so. He decided to attempt to forge an alliance with the imperial prince Nakano Oe, a young man with a reputation for bravery, and he is said to have approached the 19-year-old prince after a game of kemari, a hacky-sack-like sport popular in the ancient Japanese imperial court. The two quickly became friends, and Nakano Oe, sharing many of Kamatari's concerns, agreed to join in on his plot. In 645, in the midst of an official ceremony in the Great Hall of State, the Daigokuden, welcoming diplomats from the Korean peninsula, the two put their plan into motion. They had tasked one of their subordinates with attacking Soga no Iruka, who was present at the ceremony, but when the time came to act, the man froze with fear and failed to move. According to legend, Prince Nakano Oe noticed his subordinate's hesitation, and knowing it was now or never, stepped forward, drew his sword, and cut down Iruka himself. The news of Iruka's death was quickly passed on to Soga no Emishi, who despaired and took his own life rather than attempting to mount a counterattack. With this assassination, known to history as the Ishii Incident or Ishii no Hen, the Soga clan's main line was extinguished, and Japan's political world was freed from their vice-like grip. Prince Nakano Oe and Nakatomi no Kamatari's ambitions did not end here, however, as they had great plans for the future which they promptly intended to start putting into action. With the Soga out of the picture, the two men would begin drastically restructuring the Yamato Kingdom's government, kicking off a series of reforms known to future generations as the Taika no Kaishin, the Taika reforms. That story, however, will have to wait till next time. The latter half of the 7th century holds a lot in store for Japan, both at home and abroad, and on our next episode we will explore the eventful life of Prince Nakano Oe, as well as the tumultuous months that followed in the wake of his death. We will also see Japan's first true Tenno emperor take to the throne, but I don't want to give too much away, so I'll stop here. As always, thanks for watching, have a great day, and boom,